June 1944, northern coast of France. The air still trembles with the echoes of naval gunfire, though the barrage has faded into the distance. Dawn breaks reluctantly, as if unsure whether it should illuminate a coastline transformed by chaos. Smoke lingers over the horizon in long, drifting bands, remnants of the greatest amphibious landing the world has ever seen. And standing upon a battered cliffside, coat pulled tight against the cold Atlantic wind, is a German engineer named Albrecht Krämer, blinking in disbelief as he surveys the shoreline below. Just days earlier, this stretch of beach had been a maze of steel traps, mines, anti-tank obstacles and fortifications, a place fortified defended, and, according to every German calculation, impossible to convert into a functional harbor without months of heavy machinery and thousands of workers. But the Americans had arrived with something else entirely impossible: ambition. From Krämer's vantage point, the scene is surreal. Hundreds of landing craft dart across the water in orchestrated motion. Seabees, drenched in sweat and seawater, unload crates of prefabricated steel. Massive floating caissons, towering artificial breakwaters, are dragged into position by tugboats roaring with effort. Welding torches hiss in bright blue arcs. Pontoons clang as they lock together with rhythmic, metallic precision. The shoreline becomes a construction zone alive with urgency, purpose, and a kind of relentless confidence that defies the very logic he spent his life mastering. He watches as American officers shout commands through the wind, their voices cutting through the roar of engines and crashing waves. Every man seems to know his role. Every piece seems to fall into place. 10 days, they said. 10 days to build a port large enough to feed an army. And as the first massive pier extends into the breaking surf, Krämer realizes with dawning shock that they may actually do it. A coastline of shattered fortifications slowly giving way to an emerging city of steel rising from the Krämer's disbelief begins not with the thunder of engines or the distant echo of naval artillery, but with something far more subtle, an unnatural rhythm in the surf, a pattern in the chaos that suggests purpose rather than chance. At first, he thinks the tide has shifted. The waves seem to pulse in regular intervals, beating against the shoreline as though responding to some invisible command. It is only when he focuses, narrowing his eyes against the sting of salt and wind, that he realizes the truth. The rhythm is man-made. It comes from steel meeting water, from pontoons colliding, locking, and grinding together into place, from a choreography unfolding across the sea with an energy unlike anything he has ever witnessed. Down on the beach, long before the sun has fully claimed the horizon, American engineers are already hard at work. Their silhouettes move with purpose across the wet sand, boots sinking into the grainy surface as they carry heavy timber, crates of tools, and sections of metal framework. The cold Atlantic wind lashes at them, but they seem unmoved by its bite. Their jackets whip violently behind them, sleeves snapping against their arms as they bend to secure ropes, tighten bolts, and shout instructions over the roar of the tides. The beach is alive with noise. Hammers striking steel, torches hissing with fierce blue fire, chains clattering against metal surfaces, engines rumbling as landing craft churn back and forth in a relentless shuttle. Krämer stands on the cliffside, the cold rock scraping against his boots, and tries to make sense of what is happening before him. As a senior engineer, he once believed he had a firm grasp on what it takes to construct a functioning port. Months of surveys, weeks of establishing foundations, endless calculations, specialized machinery, an army of trained workers, every variable accounted for, every risk mitigated. What he sees now fits none of these expectations. The Americans are building a harbor not piece by piece, but all at once. An explosion of activity, hundreds of tasks happening simultaneously, each feeding into the next with baffling precision. He watches as the first set of pontoons, massive floating modules that look like rectangular steel beasts, are maneuvered into place by crews waist, deep in the frigid surf. Their faces are red from the cold, their gloves soaked through, but their movements are confident. A sailor grips a rope as thick as his forearm, shouting to the others to pull. 4 more join him, digging their heels into the wet sand, leaning their full weight into the task. The pontoon lurches forward, slamming into alignment with a deep metallic boom that resonates through the air like a drumbeat. A welding team rushes in immediately, torches flaring to life with eerie blue light as they fuse the sections together. Sparks cascade down onto the water, sizzling and dying as they meet the foam. The smell hits him next, acrid and sharp, the scent of diesel exhaust mixed with heating metal. It burns faintly in his nose. The ocean air, usually crisp and briny, is drowned beneath the industrial aroma of American machinery. Generators thrum like restless beasts, their internal components rattling with mechanical fury. The smell of fuel hangs heavy, thickening the air until Krämer feels as though he can taste it on his tongue. And beneath it all is something else. The faint but unmistakable aroma of wet earth, turned to mud under the weight of men and machines moving across the shoreline. To his left, he spots a group of German prisoners of war being marched toward the work zone by 2 American guards. Their uniforms are ragged, the fabric thinning from weeks of wear, but their posture stiffens as they approach the construction site. The younger prisoners exchange glances. Confusion, curiosity, maybe even fear. They were told they would be clearing debris from the beach, not witnessing history unfold in real time. As they draw closer, some slow their steps, stunned into silence by the scale of the operation unfolding in front of them. One prisoner mutters a curse under his breath, shaking his head as if trying to dispel the illusion. Another looks skyward, perhaps hoping the morning fog will thicken enough to hide what he sees. Krämer recognizes their expressions. He feels the same disbelief tightening in his chest. He had spent years designing coastal fortifications. He had studied the physics of waves, the behavior of currents, the stress limits of concrete and steel. And yet none of those calculations prepared him for the sight of Americans constructing a harbor directly onto the sea. On top of it, moving dynamically with the tides rather than waiting for the tides to calm, it defied the patient, methodical engineering he knew. This was construction by momentum. Raw, overwhelming force meeting sheer determination. He shifts his weight, gripping the edge of a rock for balance as a gust of wind nearly knocks his cap off. The sky above is still streaked with dawn's red glow, clouds drifting in low, heavy formations. Against this shifting backdrop, the Americans look like dark, determined figures silhouetted by torches and machinery. One engineer raises his arm, signaling a crew on a nearby landing craft. The boat's engine roars, sending plumes of white water spraying outward as it pivots and pushes a new section of roadway toward the expanding structure. Men leap from the craft onto the floating platform with practiced ease, their boots striking the steel with a metallic clang. They secure the new piece with long steel pins driven by sledgehammers, each blow echoing across the beach like cannon fire. The sea fights back, waves slam against the pontoons, spraying cold water into the faces of the workers. But they keep going, wiping their eyes with gloved hands, leaning into their tasks with tireless resolve. A surge knocks one man off balance, but he catches himself, grips a handrail, and continues without hesitation. Another worker shouts something. Krämer cannot hear the words, but the tone is unmistakable. Determination, urgency, pressure. Every second seems to matter. Farther down the shoreline, a cluster of heavy equipment roars to life. Bulldozers push aside wreckage and debris left behind by the invasion. Cranes swivel on their bases, lowering yet more prefabricated sections of metal framework toward the water. The clinking of chains, the screech of machinery, and the rhythmic boom of steel on steel merge together into a cacophony that shakes the coastline. Krämer realizes the Americans are not simply building a port. They are waging a construction offensive with the same energy and discipline they bring to combat. A group of officers stands behind the main cluster of workers, scanning maps and blueprints. One of them gestures sharply toward a point offshore, and moments later, a tugboat adjusts its course, dragging a massive floating platform into a new position. The coordination is flawless. There is no hesitation, no confusion. Every man moves with instinctive familiarity, as though they have rehearsed this exact operation countless times. Perhaps they have. Krämer had heard rumors of the Allies planning portable harbors, but German intelligence dismissed them as impractical fantasy. Now, watching the scene unfold, he understands the enormity of. He observes the welders next. Their torches burn bright against the gray morning, casting long, wavering reflections across the wet metal at their feet. Sparks fly in chaotic arcs, bouncing off gloves, landing on sleeves, and sizzling out on the seawater below. The welders move with surprising grace, their motions fluid despite the bulky equipment they wear. Each seam they fuse strengthens the growing roadway, locking it together piece by piece, until it begins to stretch outward into the surf like an arm reaching for the horizon. In the distance, more landing craft approach, their engines growling like restless animals. They carry additional supplies, steel plates, support beams, fuel drums, and crates marked with tools Krämer has never seen before. The Americans seem to possess an endless supply of equipment. He watches as they unload yet another set of pontoons, sliding them into the water with the help of cranes and pulleys. Men jump onto the floating structures, securing them with ropes that strain under the weight. Commands echo across the water, carried by the wind but distorted by distance. Still, the coordination remains flawless. What stuns Krämer more than anything is the atmosphere among the workers. Despite the cold, the danger, and the sheer difficulty of the task, there is an unmistakable energy driving them. Some men laugh despite the freezing spray hitting their faces. Others shout encouragement to their comrades. When one section slips dangerously out of alignment, instead of panicking, the crew moves together to correct it. Pushing, pulling, hammering, shouting until the pontoon snaps into place with a metallic groan that ripples across the water. He compares this scene to the German engineering crews he once commanded. His men worked with precision, but they worked slowly, methodically, driven by calculation and caution. The Americans work with a different spirit altogether. It is not reckless, but it is bold, aggressive, a kind of confidence that borders on defiance. They know the sea is dangerous. They know the timeline is absurd, but they also know the task must be done, and done quickly, because an entire army depends on it. Krämer's gaze shifts to the tools strewn across the sand. Wrenches the size of his forearm, coiled cables, welding masks glinting in the thin sunlight, heavy crates marked with military codes. Some boxes spill open, revealing spare parts, components for joints, bolts, clamps, couplings, all standardized, all ready to use. The sheer uniformity and abundance of equipment leaves him speechless. It is a logistical marvel, a mobile industrial complex transported across the ocean and unleashed upon a hostile coastline. In the midst of this chaos, a young American engineer kneels beside a damaged pontoon connector. He taps the metal with a gloved hand, studying it with the calm focus of a surgeon examining a wound. After a moment, he signals to his team. They lift the connector, adjust its alignment, and within minutes, it is welded back into place. The speed and competence are astonishing. Krämer realized this single moment. The repairing of one connection would have taken hours under German procedures, wrapped in paperwork and validation. Here it takes minutes. A sudden blast of sound erupts from the shoreline. A foghorn from one of the tugboats signaling another major movement. The ground beneath Krämer vibrates slightly as the tug begins, pulling another massive section toward the growing structure. The chain attached to it whips through the water, throwing up arcs of white spray. The men guiding it brace themselves, gripping the ropes tightly, leaning as one unit. Their muscles strain visibly through their wet uniforms. Krämer watches with a tightening jaw. It is not merely the physical effort that astounds him, but the unity. Every man's action complements the others. Every shout has purpose. Every movement fits into the larger design. He realizes then that he is witnessing a culture of engineering unlike any he has known, one fueled not by hierarchy or rigid planning, but by adaptability, teamwork, and relentless drive. Hours pass, though the momentum never slows. By the fourth day, Krämer finds himself returning to the cliffs each morning almost involuntarily, as though compelled by some mixture of dread and fascination. The coastline below has transformed so dramatically that he no longer recognizes it. What was once an unbroken horizon of open water is now populated by silhouettes of machinery and colossal structures floating like iron islands. A faint haze hangs over the beach, formed from exhaust fumes, welding smoke, and sea mist mingling into a gauzy veil. Through it, movement is constant. Men, vehicles, boats, cranes, cables, all weaving together in one great, roaring, synchronized effort. It is no longer simply construction. It has become spectacle. He notices the sound first, the omnidirectional hum of industrial force. It reverberates through the cliffs, vibrating the soles of his boots. The crash of waves now competes with the deep, resonant grinding of massive engines. Tugboats snarl like beasts in harness. Their propellers churn the water into frothy white spirals, as they drag forward the most extraordinary of all the components, the Phoenix Caissons. Krämer had heard of such structures only in rumors, huge floating caissons made of reinforced concrete, each as large as a multi-story building, designed to be sunk into position to form a breakwater so massive it could tame the Atlantic itself. German engineers dismissed the concept as impractical, impossible to maneuver under wartime conditions. Yet here, before his eyes, the Allies are doing exactly that. The first caisson approaches slowly from the deeper waters, dwarfed only by the tall plumes of spray breaking against its sides. Its walls rise like the face of a stone fortress, pitted with metal scaffolding and wet with seawater that glistens in the morning light. Tugboats strain in coordinated motion, their engines bellowing as cables creak under tremendous tension. Krämer feels his breath catch as he watches the operation. The scale alone is shocking. This floating monolith moves with the inevitability of a mountain sliding across the earth. The waves pound against it angrily, smashing into its sheer walls, but the caisson refuses to yield. Instead, it cuts through the water with steady momentum, pushed, pulled, and guided by a disciplined ballet of mechanical power and human precision. As it nears the designated point offshore, a chorus of shouted commands ripples across the construction zone. Officers gesture sharply, some standing on makeshift platforms, others on boats. The communication is constant, whistles blowing, arms signaling, voices rising above the wind. It is organized chaos, but organized nonetheless. Every American seems to know the exact sequence of movements needed to maneuver this massive structure into its final position. The caisson must align perfectly, Krämer realizes, or the entire breakwater will fail. Yet the workers move without hesitation as though this impossible, perilous, monumental task, were simply another day's assignment. Closer to shore, cranes have been set up, their long arms swinging methodically across the sky. Their cables drop toward the rising platforms, lowering additional components with practiced fluidity. Cargo trucks, their tires caked with sand and salt, crawl along the beach in endless lines, delivering beams, concrete anchors, and machinery. The trucks are coated in mud up to their wheel wells, yet they keep coming, one after another, more in number than Krämer can count. Their engines rumble steadily, feeding the construction effort with an uninterrupted stream of materials. Occasionally, a truck backfires, releasing a thick puff of smoke that blends into the mist, but it never slows, not even for a moment. The air is thick with competing smells. The tang of salt water mixes with the sharp bite of burning diesel. Sparks from welding torches fill the breeze with a faint metallic scent, and the grinding of steel on steel sends vibrations through the ground. The atmosphere feels charged, not just with electricity from the welding arcs, but with the sheer energy of creation at a scale Krämer never believed possible under wartime pressure. As the caisson reaches its position, a sudden surge of shouts erupts. The cables tighten. Tugboats rev at full throttle. The caisson pivots slightly, aligning with an almost uncanny precision. This is the moment Krämer has been waiting for. The anchor point, the foundation of the new harbor. The sea fights violently, as if determined to prevent this unnatural intrusion. Waves explode against the caisson's sides, erupting into towering bursts of foam. But the Americans hold their positions, muscles taut, bodies leaning into the effort. Even from his distant vantage point, Krämer can see the tension rippling through the ropes and cables, can almost feel the strain in the arms of the men pulling them. Then, suddenly, a deep roar echoes across the water. A resonant, bone-shaking thunder as the valves on the caisson are opened. Water pours into its hollow interior, flooding the chambers, causing the massive structure to settle. The sound is breathtaking, like the rushing of a subterranean river. The caisson sinks slowly, its immense weight pressing downward until, with a violent rush of displaced water, it slams onto the seabed. The resulting wave surges outward, spraying the nearby boats. A cheer erupts from the workers, rising above the roar of engines and surf. Even the officers, normally stoic and composed, allow themselves brief smiles. One of the greatest feats of the harbor construction has just succeeded. Krämer's heart drops. The finality of that moment tells him everything he needs to know. The Americans are not merely planning to complete this port. They are well on their way. A second caisson follows, then a third. Each one is maneuvered with the same audacious coordination, guided by a network of boats and signals. The workers on the decks appear tireless, moving like parts of a living machine. Some operate cranes with calm, practiced motions. Others handle winches and pulleys, guiding the lines with both strength and delicate precision. The teamwork is astonishing. Not a single step out of place, not a moment wasted. On the beach, Seabees gather near the shoreline, their uniforms darkened by salt water and soot. They shout instructions to one another, sometimes over laughter, sometimes through gritted teeth. Their hands are thickly gloved, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat. Despite the cold, their breaths come in hot, rapid bursts as they labor to prepare the next segment of the floating roadway. They move the way seasoned soldiers do in battle, not with hesitation or doubt, but with absolute trust in one another. Krämer watches as they anchor a new support beam, driving it into place with heavy hammers. The blows ring out in sharp, metallic bursts, each one sending vibrations through the platform beneath them. As the breakwater begins to take shape, the water behind it transforms from turbulent chaos into something calmer, a pocket of protected sea forming like a developing embryo. The waves break against the rising wall with diminishing force, their energy absorbed by the massive concrete blocks now rooted to the ocean floor. The transformation is startling. Where violent surf once ruled, now the water begins to settle. It becomes a functional zone, a pocket where future ships will unload their lifeblood. Farther out to sea, a crane ship positions itself near the new breakwater, its immense boom towering against the cloudy sky. The ship's engine thunders as the crane swings into motion, lifting a massive segment of steel framework from its deck. The cables strain audibly, groaning under the load. The workers on the ship yell up to the crane operator, guiding him with hand signals and whistles. The operator reacts with astonishing speed, as though anticipating their movements before they even finish signaling. The beam swings through the air, descending toward a group of men waiting on the half-completed pier. They reach for it the moment it is close enough, aligning it on its supports, shouting for adjustments. The ship shifts slightly in the swell, causing the beam to sway dangerously, but the workers react instantly. They move as a unit, stabilizing it with ropes and poles. Within minutes, they secure it in place, hammering bolts through its joints, tightening them with giant wrenches. The pier lengthens, growing outward like a spine of iron. Everywhere Krämer looks, the Americans are expanding the harbor with relentless momentum. He watches a welder lean over the edge of a platform, sparks flaring beneath him like cascading stars as he seals a joint. Nearby, mechanics repair a faulty generator, their hands moving quickly despite the cold metal. A group of soldiers unload sandbags from a truck, reinforcing the shoreline against the incoming tide. The entire scene resembles a living organism, a vast, coordinated organism whose purpose is creation, not destruction. Then another caisson is brought into place. The process repeats, but the shock never diminishes. Each one is a mountain toppling into the sea. Each one expands the breakwater, extending the zone of calm water where future ships will anchor. Krämer watches with a mixture of admiration and despair as water again pours into the structure's chambers, pulling it downward with unstoppable force. The impact sends another plume of surf erupting into the sky. Again, the American workers cheer. Again, officers exchange knowing glances. The breakwater now stretches across a remarkable span of the coastline, forming a protective barrier that bleeds the violence from the waves. Behind it, the water becomes a laboring ground for cranes, boats, and workers handling materials with increasing ease. The transformation is undeniable. The Americans are not battling the sea, they are taming it. As the day progresses, the clouds begin to lift, and pale sunlight spills onto the beach. It glints against wet metal, casting shimmering reflections across the growing harbor. The workers pause, only to wipe sweat from their brows before returning to their tasks. Some remove their jackets, steam rising from their bodies in the cold air. Others drink hastily from canteens, hands trembling from exhaustion but eyes still focused. Krämer realizes that the Allies' strength is not simply their industrial capacity. It is their relentless will to use it. Their willingness to push through exhaustion, through uncertainty, through danger. Their refusal to accept the limitations imposed by nature or engineering theory. It is a cultural force, a mindset he had never fully grasped. And now, watching the harbor rise from the sea, he finally understands what it means. The Americans are building not just a port, but momentum. Momentum that Germany will not be able to stop. On the 10th day, Krämer returns to his usual vantage point atop the cliff, his coat damp from the persistent Atlantic mist and the cold morning wind that whips relentlessly across the coastline. The transformation below is staggering, almost incomprehensible. Where once the beach had been a chaotic, shattered zone of debris, jagged metal, and jagged craters left by shellfire, there now stretches a functional, bustling harbor, an artificial city rising from the surf, forged in steel concrete and unyielding human will. Every step he takes toward the edge of the cliff seems to bring him closer to the impossible reality. The Americans have done what he and countless engineers believed could not be done in a single, frantic week and a half. The port is alive, its energy palpable even from hundreds of feet above, radiating outward like a heartbeat synchronized with the crashing waves. The first thing Krämer notices is the scale. The breakwater, composed of giant phoenix caissons, now stretches far into the Atlantic, taming the once chaotic waves into a series of calmer, protected waters. These colossal concrete structures, each sunk with almost surgical precision, stand as monolithic guardians of the harbor, their surfaces still slick with seawater and spray, yet immovable. Between them, the newly laid floating roadways connect sections of the harbor, Steel plates and pontoons locked into place with bolts and welds that gleam faintly in the rising sun. Men move across these pathways like ants on a meticulously engineered network, carrying crates of supplies, tools, and equipment. The sheer coordination and speed of the operation leave Krämer's mind spinning. He has spent his life studying engineering feats, yet nothing in his experience can explain the fluidity, the orchestration, and the audacity of what he now sees. Cargo ships are arriving. They glide into the newly protected waters as though drawn by a magnet. Their hulls slice through the Atlantic with minimal resistance, guided toward the piers by tugs and signaling boats. Soldiers on deck shout instructions, their voices carrying over the roar of engines and crashing surf. Men leap onto floating platforms, their boots splashing through shallow pools that reflect the morning light. Crates of ammunition, food, medical supplies, and fuel are unloaded with mechanical precision. One after another, they are hoisted by cranes that pivot like the arms of giant metallic sentinels, dropping their loads onto waiting trucks, which then rumble inland along hastily constructed roads. Each movement is seamless, almost choreographed, yet it occurs in real time under the unpredictable whims of wind, water, and tide. Krämer can barely process it. The volume and speed of logistics are staggering. He had once studied the supply lines of entire armies and the months it would take to bring them to a functional port. Here, it is accomplished in a matter of days. The human element is equally remarkable. Seabees, engineers, and soldiers work tirelessly in the cold spray, their faces streaked with salt, sweat, and soot. Some are shirtless despite the chill, muscles taut and glistening with exertion. Others are bundled against the wind, yet their movements are precise and efficient. They coordinate without pause, responding instantly to signals, adapting to shifting loads, and correcting errors without hesitation. Krämer observes one small mishap. A crane's cable slips slightly while lowering a heavy crate onto a dock, the crate teetering dangerously for a split second before the crew stabilizes it with ropes and pulleys. A cheer rises from the men as it lands safely, and they immediately move to the next task, never lingering on what could have been disaster. The ability to react in such unison, to move as a single organism with shared purpose and understanding, leaves him in awe. From his vantage point, Krämer notes the extraordinary synchronization between land and sea. Tugboats and smaller craft maneuver with astounding precision, corralling each arriving ship, adjusting for tidal currents, wind, and the shifting position of floating caissons. Generators hum steadily, providing the electricity needed to power welding equipment, lights, and cranes. Welders flash brilliant arcs across steel plates, sparks cascading into the water, evaporating instantly, creating miniature fireworks along the dock edges. The smell of molten metal, mingled with diesel exhaust, salt, and seaweed, fills the air, a pungent testament to both the violence and artistry of the operation. Every sensory detail signals relentless activity, the creak of pulleys under strain, the groan of steel as loads shift, the pounding of hammers driving bolts deep into concrete, and the occasional shout of a foreman giving precise directions above the constant noise. Ships continue to arrive in steady waves, carrying everything the Americans need to maintain momentum. Supply vessels, medium cargo carriers, and landing crafts disgorge their contents seamlessly. Containers slide across gangplanks, passengers leap into the water to stabilize floating platforms, and officers scribble notes or shout coordinates to dock workers. In the midst of it all, cranes pivot, lifting tons of material with balletic precision. One enormous beam, over 20 feet long and weighing several tons, is swung into place above a section of pier under construction. Workers lean into its alignment, correcting angles as it descends, sweat streaming down their faces, muscles flexing with every adjustment. The beam settles with a satisfying metallic thud, and another cheer rises from the dock, echoing across the harbor. Krämer's gaze is drawn to the water itself. The once tumultuous waves now lap gently against the breakwater, their power diminished by the sheer presence of the caissons. Small boats navigate the inner harbor with ease, their movements unhindered by the violence of the Atlantic beyond. The sea, once a symbol of unpredictability and danger, has been tamed by human ingenuity, transformed into a working space where industry and warfare intersect seamlessly. The juxtaposition is breathtaking, the eternal chaos of nature subdued by the precise, tireless effort of men, machines, and coordination. He notices the Americans themselves, their discipline remarkable but not rigid. Laughter occasionally bursts forth, brief and sharp, cutting through the relentless rhythm of work. Soldiers clap each other on the back after particularly difficult maneuvers, not in silent approval, or shout encouragement to colleagues. Even amid exhaustion, there is a sense of pride, almost joy in the accomplishment. Each man seems aware, consciously or unconsciously, of his role in a larger, historic moment. Krämer sees the unity and determination on every face. A young soldier guiding a crate into position, a foreman adjusting a pulley, a welder leaning over the edge of a platform, sparks flaring in his wake. It is as if every human in this operation is a note in a larger symphony, each essential, each contributing to the crescendo that is the newly completed harbor. The logistical mastery is staggering. Trucks and supply lines stretch along the shoreline, some carrying fuel drums, others laden with medical supplies or ammunition. The flow is uninterrupted. Drivers navigate mud, water, and steel plates without delay, moving with the confidence that nothing, neither tide, wind, nor weight, will halt their progress. On the piers, cranes lower supplies with machine-like precision, and workers sort, stack, and distribute materials with astonishing speed. Even small details like securing ropes or adjusting chains are handled instantly, without hesitation, as if preordained by an invisible hand guiding the operation. Krämer realizes that this is more than engineering. It is orchestration, logistics, and human will converging into a single unstoppable force. The magnitude of the operation becomes clearer as he scans the horizon. Each completed section of the harbor supports multiple tasks simultaneously. Dock workers unload one ship while another vessel is maneuvered into position. A crane hoists beams onto a partially completed pier as welders seal joints nearby. Vehicles transport supplies inland, and workers prepare the next segments for assembly. Every component is in motion, synchronized in a way that belays the chaos inherent in such a massive undertaking. Krämer feels a growing sense of unease mingled with the sun climbs higher, illuminating the harbor and casting reflections off wet steel, concrete, and water. Light glints off tools, bolts, and wet clothing, creating a kaleidoscope of motion. Waves crash against the breakwater with diminished force, sending sheets of spray high into the air. Cranes pivot and sway gently with the sea breeze, carrying their burdens with steady grace. Soldiers and engineers move like living instruments, their rhythm synchronized with the mechanical pulse of the machines and the measured ebb of the tide. The port has become a living organism, breathing and pulsing in time with the labor of thousands, the hum of engines, and the roar of the sea. Even the German prisoners assisting in minor tasks cannot disguise their astonishment. Their hands shake slightly as they carry beams or fasten bolts. They exchange glances, silent and wide-eyed, unable to comprehend the speed and precision of the harbor's construction. Krämer watches them, recognizing the same incredulity reflected in his own expression. He has spent his life analyzing military engineering and supply logistics, yet nothing in textbooks or experience could have prepared him for this. It is not merely the scale or the speed. It is the integration, the unity of human effort and mechanical precision, the mastery over the natural and logistical obstacles that had seemed insurmountable. By mid-morning, the harbor is fully functional. Ships glide effortlessly to the piers, cranes lift their cargo, and trucks ferry supplies inland. The floating roadways bear the weight of machinery, vehicles, and men without faltering. Breakwaters absorb the energy of the waves, creating calm pools of water where operations continue unhindered. The visual impact is extraordinary: steel, concrete, and human labor stretching across the coastline in a monument to ingenuity and determination. Krämer stands frozen, heart pounding, as the reality sinks in. The Americans have not merely completed a construction project, they have altered the dynamics of the campaign. They have created an engine of war, unstoppable, immovable, and already operational. Even as he watches, more ships arrive, more cranes swing into action, and more men pour onto the docks. The rhythm of the harbor continues uninterrupted, a testament to meticulous planning and unrelenting human effort. Krämer's mind races. He knows that what he sees is not temporary. This harbor will sustain armies, transport supplies, and shift the balance of power along this coast. It is a victory of logistics, coordination, and sheer determination. A triumph not measured in explosions or firepower, but in bolts tightened, beams aligned, and concrete sunk into the ocean floor. He steps back, taking in the entirety of the operation. From the cliff's edge, the harbor stretches like a living, breathing entity, pulsating with motion and purpose. Ships move, cranes pivot, men labor, and water laps against the newly tamed sea. The scale, precision, and speed are overwhelming. Krämer feels a mix of admiration and foreboding, understanding that history is being written beneath his eyes. The Americans have done the impossible. They have built not just a harbor, but a promise of unstoppable momentum. The port stands as both shield and conduit, a foundation of victory forged in steel, concrete, and human will. Krämer finally steps back from the cliff's edge, letting his eyes take in the harbor in its entirety, and for a moment, he allows himself to breathe. The wind carries the mixed scent of saltwater, diesel, and molten metal, but now it feels different. Charged not with chaos, but with purpose. He watches as the first fully loaded cargo ship is guided smoothly into the pier, cranes swinging like great iron arms, unloading the lifeblood of an army. Food, ammunition, medical supplies, all moving with relentless efficiency. Soldiers and engineers navigate the docks with fluid precision, their movements a seamless choreography of human determination and mechanical power. The ocean, once a wild and unforgiving barrier, has been tamed, its waves subdued by sheer ingenuity and indomitable will. Krämer's mind reels at the enormity of what has been accomplished. In just 10 days, what should have taken months, perhaps even years, has been made real. The port is no longer a collection of floating platforms, caissons, and steel. It is a symbol, a living testament to the triumph of coordinated effort over impossibility, to the relentless human capacity to shape the world even under the harshest conditions. He feels a chill, not from the cold wind, but from the realization that the rules have changed. The balance of power has shifted with precision as tangible as any cannon fired, as decisive as any battle fought, and as he watches the sun glint off wet steel, casting shimmering light across the bustling harbor, Krämer cannot help but feel the weight of history pressing down upon him. Here, on this scarred coastline, humans have done what nature and circumstance seem to forbid. Here, a feat of engineering has become a force of destiny, and the world will never see the same coastline in the same way again. Some victories, he thinks, are won not with guns, but with the courage to build the impossible.